Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing another reaction video. We're looking at Joe Rogan. This time the video is entitled The Problem with the Standard American Diet. We're going to see, is he talking fact or cap? Let's see what Mr. Rogan's got to say for himself. I'm kind of looking forward to this because, you know, he's a big carnivore. He normally talks a bit of nonsense. So here we go.
You're going to need fat. If you don't, you're going to get fatigued. It'll start fucking with you. And that's one of the reasons why I got really into tallow and really started eating a lot of bacon and things like that.
Why do you think there's such like a national misconception that fat's bad for your body? Because I hear that from a lot of people. Like, I don't.
We need fat. Like, fat's really good for us. Fat is great for us. They sound like they're fetishizing it a little bit. It sounds a bit like they're bathing in it or something like that, which we don't need that much fat.
Eat it, it's fat.
Well, they were told that for the longest time. Well, first of all, there's real evidence that sugar and these companies that made sugar paid scientists to fuck with data to put heart disease and all these problems that people are having with clogged arteries, to push that off on saturated fat,
right? And
to take that away from sugar,
right?
And sugar is terrible for you. Sugar in that form is so unnatural.
Ooh, it's not natural. like the fucking internet's natural. like podcasts are natural. I mean, come on. Just because the appeal to nature is obviously one of the most, like, the oldest things. It's like, it's not natural, you should eat natural foods. Yeah, of course, defining what natural foods are is very, very difficult to do. There's lots of foods that are based on natural ingredients and they could potentially be bad for us. And there's lots of foods that are based on natural ingredients that could be good for us. Just saying that something's not natural is problematic. And also completely demonizing sugar is also a little bit problematic as well. Sugar in itself is not bad for us. It's a carbohydrate. It's useful for our bodies. We have energy. We can do things when we have it. And now there was, going back in history, there was obviously a problem with fat. Like, if anyone who lived through the 80s and I guess 90s as well, will know that fat was demonized as being the big problematic thing. And that's why we end up with thousands of low-fat products these days. However, the science around that maybe was a bit skewed, but let's see what else they're saying.
Right. Fat in the form of meat is very natural. Mm-hmm. It's what human beings have been eating since the beginning of time.
Yeah, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated fats, all pretty good for you. Just like stay away from trans fat. But
saturated fat is okay in small amounts. Lots of saturated fat's bad for you. It's like really simple. To be honest, it's the case with most things in food. Moderation is fine. Eat lots of them, you might have a problem.
Unsaturated fats that come from vegetable oils, like I think it's called linoleic acid, is fucking terrible for you.
Really?
Not only is it terrible for you, there's real evidence that it makes you hungry. That like you're eating it and there's no nutrients in it, so your body gets hungrier. Look, throughout human history.
Look, all of these things that they're going on about, the problem with everything they're saying is they're going, look, this one compound is problematic, or this one thing is really good for you. And food is not that simple. We can't just go, if I eat spinach, all of my problems in life will be solved. And we can't say, if you eat trans fats, all of your problems. Well, actually, I mean, trans fats, I think, are one of the things that genuinely is bad for us. However, we also can't just sort of pin problems on a single ingredient, like, it's all sugar's fault. That's the obesity epidemic, is just sugar's fault. Like, that's such a simplistic view. It is a far more complex issue than that. So the moment that someone's promoting or demonizing just one very single ingredient, then it's kind of like stepping away from the big picture. And the big picture, when it comes to food, is what really matters.
There's never been a time until recently where people got oils directly from plants in large quantities like that. You know,
there's never been a time until recently where people got their nutritional advice from ex-MMA wrestlers on podcasts either. But you're kind of totally cool with that, aren't you, Joe?
Oil from plants, it was like oil from avocado, it was like natural. Mm-hmm. Or you got your oil from, beef fat or chicken fat or things that's natural for human beings.
Right.
These saturated fats that are natural, your body knows what to do.
If you follow that logic, every fat is natural. Like olive oil, taken from olives, it's a natural fat. Like Palm oil. It's a natural fat because it just comes from the palm kernels from palm trees. They're all natural.
Your body doesn't know what the fuck to do with canola oil. You know?
What is it? Your body's like, what the fuck is
right.
this?
Your body gets
These dudes, like your body's going, like canola. That's rapeseed oil, I think. Is it? Canola oil. Like, I can't live on this. I mean, it's like people are sort of like drinking pints of it or something like that. I don't know. And from what, look, I make these from a policy perspective, yeah. So I'm looking at the big picture in all of these things. And from what I understand, the evidence around canola, rapeseed oil, is not that it's actually that bad for us, you know. And again, with all of these things, I bet if you're eating a ton of it, well, yeah, maybe it might have a negative impact. But again, I bet you it's the size of the dose. I bet you that in reality, canola oil is really not that problematic.
hold of like some raw honey, your body knows exactly what to do with it. But your body gets a hold of like fucking corn syrup and that kind of shit. It's like, what is this? It just doesn't make sense to your body. And I think we've gotten into this processed food thing. And processed food is almost entirely like if you it's first of all it's a new human creation.
Yeah.
And it should never be your first choice. Your first choice should be natural foods. You know, first.
Okay, so actually, I'm going to take him up on that one. So when he's talking about processed foods, this is a really good point. Obviously, I've done a lot of content about ultra-processed foods. And ultra-processed foods are a really interesting concept because what they do is they provide us with ways of getting different nutrients in very convenient, often very palatable methods that it becomes very easy to eat a lot of them. I did an experiment myself, eating lots of Pringles versus roasted potatoes with oil. Found it much easier to consume the calories via Pringles rather than via potato. Now, it probably is healthier to start with what we would call whole foods. So whole foods are simply things that what in the processing category is category 1. So that's things like fruit, vegetable, cuts of meat, fish, basically things that come off the tree, off the land, out of the ocean, and you just get them as they are. And then you can obviously go and cook them and make them into a dish. And that's generally what would be regarded as the better way to get your food. And the more processing there is, it's linked, as in there is a correlation to increased problems, health problems that is. However, we don't have a causal method for that yet. As in, people who eat lots and lots of ultra-processed foods are probably more likely to have certain health issues. However, we don't know what's actually causing that. And obviously, a lot of ultra-processed foods do contain high levels of fat or sugar. And we know that also those ultra-processed foods probably make people eat more of them. So it might just mean that these people are eating just way too many of the things which they shouldn't eat too much of. So he's kind of rode back on the appeal to nature a little bit there, and he has hit on something which is true. So I will give him some credit on that one.
It should be look, apple, steak, all that's normal. You can eat that. That's easy. Your body knows what the fuck to do with that. But you know, you get into like seed oils and all these like really heavily processed seed oils. Like there's real evidence that is a giant part of what's wrong with the health of Americans today.
Again, this reductionism, and nutrition is brilliant at doing this, and brilliant maybe in a bad way, as in drilling down into individual ingredients and then studying the effects of that individual ingredient. Now, there's one reason for that is because it's very hard to study entire diets. For instance, one of the reasons why it's hard to work out whether organic food is genuinely better for our health or not is because organic food encompasses many, many, many different ingredients that contain many different compounds. And then it's also very hard to find a sample group of people who have only ever eaten organic food for their entire life versus a group of people who have never eaten organic food, where you've got some kind of baseline that you can measure them against. It's just ridiculously difficult to do.
Ultra-processed vegetable oils. They're fucking terrible for you.
But it doesn't seem to me like that's a stretch in logic, right?
No.
So for just the American diet in general, for us to look at the traditional food pyramid and say, well, that's bullshit. Ultimately, you know, if grains and processed foods sit at the cornerstone of your entire diet, you're going to have some issues. You can kind of look around. You don't even have to be a rocket surgeon to figure that out. Right?
Now, the American food pyramid is a very political thing. There's been a huge amount of controversy over the years around how the people who are involved in developing it may be coerced or lobbied by big businesses, how the dairy industry, the meat industry, etc., all maybe have had their hands in the process and have influenced it. So I'm not going to defend the American food pyramid as being some kind of pinnacle of dietary guidelines and a great reference point, because it probably isn't. In fact, when you look back, they did one about 100 years ago. No, maybe about 80, 70, 80. It was like the 40s. America had some basic dietary guidelines that were more or less spot on. I think it even suggested eating less meat. But nowadays, the suggestion of eating less meat it cannot be put in the American dietary guidelines. It gets lobbied out of the way. So yeah, they're extremely political, and I'm not going to defend the American dietary guidelines because, yeah, I don't think anybody thinks that they're really doing the job they can do. However, this dude who thinks that greens are problematic this is just a whole new thing. Yeah, watch out, that spinach is going to kill you.
To figure that out, right? It's like, holy shit, obesity is an epidemic in the United States.
Yeah.
We're eating a ton of processed food, and all the guys that I know that are healthy are eating whole foods for the most part. And it's not because you have more discipline or because you have more access or wealth. I know a ton of guys that are not very wealthy that eat whole foods, and they're feeding in certain windows, and they're still in the military, still doing fucking incredibly difficult missions, and they're really healthy. So when I look around, I say, well, okay, if you stick to whole foods and you limit your amount of caloric intake, we're not dealing in a high intellect thought process here. It should be pretty easy. But I think what people...
So that is actually completely true. If you base your diet around whole foods and you make it a lot of it at home, and he said limit your caloric intake. However, there's a certain suggestion that if you are making your food at home using whole foods, that you don't need to worry too much about calories, because essentially what's going to happen is you're just going to intuitively understand when you're full. And it's very hard to, well, not very hard. It's much harder to overeat when you're cooking and making whole food meals. For instance, if you get a bag of carrots, you can eat like a kilo of carrots and it's probably about sort of 200 calories or something like that, and you'll be stuffed by the end of it. Whereas you can eat 1,000 calories worth of Pringles and, well, I mean, I've done it on many occasions and not actually been that stuffed afterwards. So what he said there about actually just having a simple whole food diet is true. And the science suggests that if you do that, you'll probably eat somewhere around 500 calories less per day than if you eat an ultra-processed diet. And that's actually based on decent research.
They want their easy button, right?
Well,
They're
you're
like,
hungry. You see Jack in the Box, you pull in, you get a burger, you're like, oh, now I feel better. But meanwhile, you just force some shit into your system.
Now, that is actually a really good point. Not the one about forcing shit into your system, the Jack in the Box, but the point about convenience. So convenience is one of the things that food businesses really push, because they know that we all don't have much time and that we're all sort of busy people, and we also sometimes don't have enough money and all these kinds of things. So cheap, convenient food is a massive win for any food business. So one of the things that we do actually face as consumers is we live in a society where convenient food is often also highly processed and maybe high in fat and sugar as well. So that's the loop that we're looking at there. So he has hit on something that is important there, that we do need to be aware of how much food is easily available and the relative healthiness of that food too.
System's got to burn off all this bullshit that you poured in there. But there's even foods that people think are healthy that are not really good for you. Like, for instance, white rice is better than brown rice.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, what's he going to say?
Like, people think white rice, like, oh, I'll have brown rice. I'm being healthy. I have brown rice.
It's got to be one of the biggest misconceptions out there.
That fucking stuff, there's arsenic in that.
But it's brown.
There's arsenic. I mean, I'd have to look up the research on that specifically. And there may well be, but here's a tip. Wash your rice. Like, literally, I think every recipe suggests washing your rice. Any one that's from any culture that eats rice on a regular basis will say wash your rice. So if there is arsenic, then I bet you just need to wash it and then it's all fine and safe. And I think brown rice has more fiber than white rice. And we need fiber. It's good for us.
Yeah, it's not
It's
good.
It looks
brown.
like grains.
But this,
That's all
the
I eat is
husk,
white rice. Yeah.
that shit is terrible
Yeah,
for
it's
you.
terrible.
Like, there's a reason why Asian cultures for a long time have been getting rid of that outside, that husk.
The Japanese got it right with food. I'm telling you.
They did.
Sushi, white rice, seaweed, just
Yeah.
all day.
Japan has a massive amount of ultra processed food. So this guy's talking out of his butt. Because everyone's watched the Netflix documentary about Okinawa, the little island off the south end of Japan where people live to 100 years old. So everyone's talking about that because it's one of the blue zones. It's like this fabled place where everyone lives this massive life and lives to like very old ages. However, Japan itself actually has, very high levels of ultra processed foods. So, it's a bit like saying, well... Be like saying, "Oh, America had it right with their beef and potatoes." I don't know.
Favorite.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of countries that figured it out. We're just not one of them. We're like ultra processed seed oils, sugar, corn syrup, preserve.
Also, this just shows that he doesn't quite understand the concepts that he's talking about. He just said ultra processed seed oils. Now, the term ultra processed refers to the Nova categorization, and the Nova categorization has 4 levels. You've got the first one, which is basically raw ingredients, like I mentioned earlier, so like fruit, veg, meat, fish, just things as they come off the land, essentially. The next one is sort of like cooking ingredients, and that'll be things like oil, honey, sugar, things that maybe have gone through one single simple process, And seed oils fall into that category. So they are a long way away from category 4, which is ultra processed. A seed oil on its own cannot be ultra processed. A seed oil that is in a more complicated manufactured food item can be in an ultra processed food item. However, the oil itself is not ultra processed.
Fucking gallons of preservatives, glyphosate on all our plants. Yeah. There's also evidence that like animals, and I've been getting into this lately, animals that eat these ultra processed foods, then you eat them. Like animals that eat like ultra processed corn, and then you eat that animal. Like you're getting some of the bullshit from the corn and some of the bullshit from that. All these seed oil acids, you're getting these things in your body too.
But that makes sense to me.
Does.
Right? It makes complete sense to me when we look at...
There is a saying that you are what you eat eats. You are what you... You are what you eat eats. I don't know. The point being that if you do eat animals, then what those animals eat has an influence on your own health. And that is a saying I've heard again. You know, the evidence on the benefits of livestock being grass-reared is well, in terms of health benefits, I think is very hard to understand. Although I do believe there are potentially slight benefits. Anyway.
What they're eating... and then you're eating them.
For sure.
Like there's really not a direct, or you're not stretching and connecting a lot of complex thought there in the sense of when people are trying to sell me on the idea, like, no, it's great. Don't worry about it. It's like, no, man, like those chickens are eating arsenic and they're packed in, you know, right on top of each other, shitting on each other everywhere. Like I'd rather have a free range egg. I'd rather have that.
So, this guy obviously doesn't know how free-range eggs work. So, in the UK, at least, obviously in America, it's different because America, in general, they have slightly lower welfare standards for animals. Don't shoot me, Americans. I know you probably will come at me now. However, in general, I think overall sales of free-range eggs are far lower in America than they are in the UK as well. However, let's talk about what happens in the UK. You have caged eggs, which basically means you get a load of chickens in a large cage. They share it. You don't get the individual battery ones anymore. They stopped years ago. So you just have a large cage with hens in it. Then you go to barn eggs or free-range eggs. And the chickens for those two systems both live in essentially the same kind of barn. They live in a massive barn. They're not separated up. You could be thousands of birds in one single barn. And the only difference is the free-range ones get to go outdoors during daylight hours. That's it. They don't get to go out at night. They have to all be in by dark, so ensure, I don't know, foxes don't eat them or whatever. Barn chickens and free-range chickens live essentially in more or less the same kind of barn. And then when you get up to organic, the next level up, then the chickens have more space again, but it's still the same principle. They're in the barn overnight and they go outdoors during the daytime. So if he's talking about birds being in a big barn and shitting all over each other, well, I mean, basically all chickens live in big barns and potentially shit on each other. So I don't know if he's actually seen how chickens are kept, because it suggests he might not have understood that.
That free-range chicken, it's no offense to however you want to eat, but it's just a preference of eating. It's pretty easy. I think that the argument comes from maybe corporate impact in marketing, where Americans will consume it without thinking and go, well, it's good because Jack in the Box told me that it's organic.
Well, I think if there's any one...
Now, that is very, very true. Things get this health halo. So manufacturers can tell us things about foods that will influence our choices and make us think positive things about that food. For example, the word sustainability has a health halo with it. So people will see that a food might be labeled as more sustainable, and they will therefore assume that it's better for them. And that's not always the case. It really isn't. So we can easily be misled. And in many cases, we can mislead ourselves, because nobody's telling us that sustainable food is necessarily healthier. I mean, hopefully it is, because it's probably better for the planet and it's probably better for us. But the point being is that it's not demonstrably healthier for us. And we just tell ourselves that. We just assume it is. And obviously manufacturers can use certain words and phrase things to make us think that a food is healthier than it really is. So he's got a good point there.
In this country where there is a massive lack of understanding in terms of like the way people perceive what's good and what's bad. It's nutrition. Mm-hmm. Because there's so few doctors that really know what the fuck they're talking about. There's doctors out there that'll tell you don't need supplements. You don't need supplements. You need a healthy, balanced diet. Right. And then you look at them, they got a gut. They look bloated.
Did he just say... no. Joe, dude, what are you talking about?
So few doctors that really know what the fuck they're talking about. There's doctors out there that'll tell you don't need supplements. You don't need supplements. You need a healthy, balanced diet. Right. Like literally,
you don't need supplements. There's evidence that supplements are totally unnecessary if you eat a balanced diet. It's really simple. Like, Americans are so obsessed with supplements. Like, sorry guys if there's any Americans watching, but outside of, I know I've visited America on a few occasions, but outside of America, we don't have anywhere near the same reliance on supplements. I mean, don't get me wrong, people in the UK kind of love them to an extent too, but in America, they're just seen as like a necessity, and they're only necessary if you have a genuine deficiency in something, which obviously should be medically tested in the first place. And then people will come along and go, oh, yeah, but, you know, like loads of men are deficient in magnesium and this and that, etc., etc. Or, oh, vitamin D is really good and all this. Yeah, but again, the majority of these things you should gain them through a healthy, or you are able to gain them through a healthy diet. Supplements are simply not necessary if you have a good diet. Sorry, end of story. It's as simple as that. They're just a massive marketing scam. Because also in America, the rules around how you promote like quasi-medical items like that, I believe, are a bit looser, as in manufacturers can get away with slightly more health claims than they can in the UK. In the UK, we have a registered list of health claims that businesses can make on foods and supplements. So they can only claim that a certain supplement has a certain effect if it has literally been approved by the government. And I believe in America, like, the sale of supplements is pretty massive, as things like athletic screens just goes to show you. But if Joe Rogan is saying it's nonsense that you don't need supplements, then he's been brainwashed by some kind of, I don't know what. Jesus. And people listen to this dude for nutritional advice. Really?
Look at them. They got a gut. They look bloated. They look like they're dying.
Okay, so what we got to learn from that, basically Joe Rogan thinks that you should just eat meat and honey and butter, and that's it. And well, I mean, what I'm waiting for is I'm going to set an alarm clock, and we're going to come back to this video in 10 years' time and find out if he's had any problems with heart disease. Because if he's eating a shit ton of saturated fat, I think the clock could be ticking. See you soon. Like and follow for more. Let me know if there's any other videos you want me to react to. Bye bye.